I froze for a moment, caught off guard by my grandfather's casual question. "So, how's your apartment?" he asked, smiling like it was the most normal thing in the world. I blinked, searching my mind for the right answer, but nothing came. It wasn't that I didn't have an apartment. It was that no one in my family had ever seemed interested in where I lived, what I did, or how I managed my life. Birthdays passed without acknowledgement. Achievements went unnoticed, and even the simplest of conversations rarely included me. Yet here he was, leaning forward with genuine curiosity, as if I mattered. The question felt like a small, quiet earthquake, shaking the foundation of years of neglect. I forced a smile, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent, feeling the weight of all the times my life had been invisible. His eyes twinkled, and I realized this wasn't idle chatter. There was something behind it, something I couldn't quite place. I could feel the tension in the room shift slightly. Everyone else seemed absorbed in their own chatter, oblivious to this tiny, unsettling moment. My heart raced with a mix of confusion and curiosity, and I wondered what he truly knew about me, what he had noticed all this time that no one else had. And in that brief, almost imperceptible pause, I sensed that my life was about to pivot in ways I could never have anticipated. I remember one birthday in particular, turning 16, standing in the living room with a small self-made cake, hoping for even a simple happy birthday from someone, anyone. My parents were busy with my older cousin's graduation party, and my siblings barely glanced in my direction. That year, like so many others, I felt like a ghost in my own family. Every achievement I had, good grades, awards, even little personal milestones, seemed to vanish the moment I tried to share them. A college acceptance letter arrived in the mail, and I carefully placed it on the kitchen counter, imagining a proud smile from my family. Instead, it was ignored, tucked away under a stack of bills, never mentioned again. The pattern repeated over and over. I worked hard, I sacrificed, I tried to belong, and yet I remained invisible. It wasn't just neglect. It was a quiet dismissal that seeped into every corner of my self-worth. I began to anticipate disappointment, to expect indifference, to lower my voice so I wouldn't be ignored, but it never helped. Looking back now, I can see how all those moments quietly built a foundation of resilience and determination. I wasn't just overlooked, I was underestimated, and in that underestimation lay the seed of something far bigger, something that no one in my family could foresee. The loneliness, the small humiliations, the constant feeling of being replaced. All of it shaped me into someone who could endure, someone who could wait. And I did wait, quietly, keeping track of every slight, every snub, every instance where I was made to feel less than I was worth. Every unnoticed birthday, every ignored accomplishment, every subtle favoritism directed toward someone else. These weren't just memories. They were pieces of a puzzle, waiting for the moment when I would finally put them all together. When my grandfather asked about my apartment, a knot formed in my stomach. The truth was complicated. I had worked tirelessly for years to secure a place I could finally call my own, but it wasn't the glamorous, envy-inducing space my family would imagine. It was modest, a little cramped, and filled with second-hand furniture I had painstakingly collected, yet it was mine, my sanctuary. Saying that aloud felt risky. If I admitted the reality, they might pity me or dismiss me further. If I embellished, it would feel dishonest, so I hesitated, fumbling for a neutral answer. "It's fine," I said finally, my voice tight, betraying none of the pride I felt inside. The room didn't react much, but I could feel the subtle judgments, the silent assumptions forming. My uncle's raised eyebrow, my cousin's smirk. They assumed I was struggling, financially weak, incapable of making my way in the world. I could feel the old sting of being underestimated crawling back, that familiar mix of shame and frustration. I wanted to scream, to tell them everything I had accomplished quietly, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I kept smiling politely, letting them believe what they wanted, all while feeling the tension coil tighter in my chest. Their assumptions, their obliviousness to the truth, fueled a quiet, simmering determination within me, a determination that this perception would soon be shattered. As I tried to steer the conversation away from my apartment, my grandfather leaned back in his chair, eyes glinting with a strange knowing. "You've been busy lately, haven't you?" he said almost casually, but the weight behind his words made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just curiosity. There was something beneath the surface, something he wasn't saying outright. I found myself analyzing every detail. The way he tilted his head, the small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, the way he lingered on my hands as if gauging my reaction. My mind raced. Did he know about the apartment? Was he aware of how my family had treated me? How invisible I had felt for years? A shiver ran down my spine as I realized this wasn't idle chatter. He had chosen his words carefully, dropping hints like breadcrumbs I was meant to follow. The room felt suddenly heavier, the air charged with unspoken knowledge. I wanted to ask directly, to demand clarity, but something held me back. There was a power in the subtlety, a quiet leverage I couldn't ignore. What did he know? And why now? My curiosity warred with caution, and for the first time in years, I felt that old underdog tension stir with a new edge. Something was coming, something I wasn't ready to face, but would have to. Every holiday, every gathering, every small achievement I celebrated alone seemed magnified when it happened to my cousins or siblings. My cousin got a scholarship? The entire family gushed over her, decorating the living room with banners and photos, praising every detail. My sibling landed a promotion? Endless congratulations, stories shared on group chats, even a dinner thrown in their honor. And me? I learned to speak softly, to downplay victories, because loud pride only seemed to earn silence or thinly veiled disinterest. I remember walking into a room once after winning a small but meaningful award, holding the certificate carefully in my hands, only to be met with polite nods and awkward smiles, while everyone else continued their conversations about someone else. The sting of invisibility burned sharper with each comparison. Envy bubbled quietly, humiliation gnawed at me, and resentment settled like a stone in my chest. I wanted recognition, acknowledgement, anything that would tell me my efforts mattered. But it never came. Instead, I learned to hide my successes, to smile at the achievements of others while silently cataloging the injustices. Every overlooked accomplishment, every ignored birthday, every moment of favoritism built a quiet fire inside me, one that waited for the right moment to turn envy into action. I realized that waiting for recognition from my family would get me nowhere. If I wanted to change how they saw me, and how I saw myself, I had to take control quietly, deliberately. I started saving every extra dollar, cutting corners, and investing in ways they would never suspect. Every late night spent researching, every phone call I made behind the scenes, was a step toward reclaiming the respect I had been denied. I took small risks at work, volunteering for projects no one else wanted, proving my capability without needing their approval. Then one afternoon, I secured a minor but satisfying victory. A project that everyone had dismissed as insignificant turned out to bring measurable success, earning me subtle recognition from outsiders, but none from my family. I felt a spark of triumph I hadn't experienced before, a taste of power simmering beneath the surface. For the first time, I realized that while they assumed I was weak or invisible, I was quietly building influence. And when the right moment came, I could turn the tables. That small, almost unnoticed win was the first reversal of expectations. Proof that the underestimated underdog could wield quiet authority, and it set my mind racing with the possibilities of what I could accomplish next. A few days after the gathering, my grandfather asked me to join him for a quiet walk in the garden. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the familiar paths I had walked countless times. But today everything felt different, charged with a sense of anticipation I couldn't quite name. He stopped near a bench, turned to me, and with a faint, knowing smile said, "You know about the apartment, don't you?" I blinked, heart pounding, unsure if I'd misheard. What apartment?" I stammered, my voice barely steady. He shook his head gently, almost amused. "The one that was always meant for you. The family estate, your portion. You've been too modest to realize it, or maybe too polite to ask. But it's yours." Disbelief surged through me like a tidal wave. Years of feeling invisible, overlooked, and undervalued collided with this sudden revelation. My hands trembled, a mixture of shock and exhilaration flooding my body. Suddenly, all the moments of neglect, favoritism, and dismissal gained new context. I wasn't powerless. I had been underestimated, yes. But now I held leverage, a tangible proof of worth and entitlement that my family had ignored for decades. My mind raced with possibilities, subtle strategies, ways to assert this newfound power, to rewrite the narrative they had constructed about me. I felt a rush of empowerment I hadn't known I could feel, and alongside it, a quiet, calculating clarity. The days of being dismissed were over. Every plan, every long-held resentment, every unnoticed effort could now converge into a moment of reckoning, and I knew exactly how I wanted it to unfold. After Grandpa's revelation, I didn't celebrate out loud. Instead, I began to move like someone who'd finally been given a chess piece on a board they thought was empty. I told no one the full truth. Instead, I adjusted my posture at family events, let my voice carry a fraction more confidence, and allowed small, deliberate slips of information to fall into conversation. Enough for them to notice, not enough for them to understand. I started accepting invitations I used to decline, appearing at the right tables and smiling in ways that suggested I belonged. I learned to let my presence fill the room without demanding attention, which somehow made people notice me in a different way. At work, I turned up my visibility. I asked for meetings I previously avoided, offered perspectives that linked me to people who mattered, and cultivated relationships that felt like insurance. I didn't flaunt any sudden wealth. There was none to flaunt, only signs of competence and taste, a new coat that fit better, a clearer, more confident tone on the phone, an anecdote about a weekend seminar that made me sound intentional. These were small calibrations, but they rewired how people perceived me. I was still the same person, but the story around me shifted. Outwardly tiny choices created inward momentum. People began to treat my words as if they had weight. With family, I planted seeds that would prompt their imaginations. I mentioned casually that I'd been sorting through some old documents. I offhandedly wondered aloud if some property paperwork existed that might have been forgotten. I made a point of asking Grandpa about obscure relatives and long-ignored parts of the estate, always with an air of curiosity, never accusation. The goal was to make the idea of my connection to the estate linger in their minds like a scent, noticeable but not traceable. I dropped references to meetings I'd attended, to lawyers I might consult someday, to renovations I'd considered. Each hint suggested a backstory without giving it away. I also began leveraging social settings as a stage. I hosted small, modest gatherings, nothing overtly luxurious, where my demeanor suggested stability and calm. I learned to make eye contact that conveyed long-term thinking, the kind of look that said, "I am here and I plan to stay." When cousins gossiped about success and inheritance, I listened, nodding slightly, dropping a quiet, knowing comment that hinted at my own involvement without revealing the whole hand. Their mouths would go slack and I could see the wheels turning. It was delicious to watch uncertainty bloom on faces that had once dismissed me. I kept a ledger of favors and slights in my head, not to be petty, but to be precise. Who had ignored me at weddings? Who had made a joke at my expense? Who had assumed I'd always be the understudy in family photos and conversations? Each memory became data, useful for deciding whom to confront, whom to withdraw from, and whom to charm. My strategy was never public humiliation. It was rearrangement. I wanted the social architecture of the family to shift in a way that felt inevitable, not vindictive. The aim was dignity, not spectacle. There were tactical risks. Once, I overheard a relative dismiss my purported plans as fantasies. I could have erupted, defended myself, spilled the secret. But instead, I smiled and let the comment sit. A week later, that same relative called me to ask a practical question about housing, and I answered in a way that suggested competence and quiet resources. The shift in their tone was immediate and revealing. They recalibrated their opinion without knowing why. Power, I discovered, is often a matter of perception, and perception can be curated with patience. I also used silence as a tool. When someone tried to provoke me, or when a relative belittled my choices, I learned to pause, inhale, and respond with a neutral, almost bored calm. It unnerved them. Their attempts at superiority lost steam when I didn't mirror the expected discomfort. Instead of pleading for acknowledgement, I allowed circumstances and timing to do the talking. It was a slow, almost surgical approach. Let them doubt, Let them ask questions. Let them feel the absence of the easy target they once had. As the months passed, the tension thickened. Conversations flickered with an undercurrent of speculation. My cousin asked Grandpa, in what she thought was private, if there had ever really been a part for me in the estate. My aunt started forwarding articles about property laws with a sudden, keen interest. At family dinners, I caught sideways glances and awkward silences where once there had been comfortable chatter. The micro-expressions, the quick shifts in eye contact, the barely suppressed curiosity, were unmistakable signs my plan was working. I was careful not to gloat. Instead, I let the uncertainty I'd sown grow into a slow-burning worry in the family's collective mind. It was a tension that needed no dramatics, only patience and a few well-placed moves, and in the quiet between their speculations, I planned my next steps. Knowing the real moment of reveal would require precision and timing, I watched and waited, sharpening my plan until the perfect moment arrived, quietly inevitable. The night of the family dinner arrived, and I felt a strange mix of anticipation and calm. The table was crowded, laughter and chatter flowing like it always had. But underneath the familiar clamor, I could sense an undercurrent of curiosity. Tiny shifts in posture, subtle glances in my direction. I had rehearsed nothing. My plan wasn't about theatrics but precision. When the conversation naturally turned to the estate and who would inherit what, I spoke up softly at first, letting my voice carry just enough to be noticed. Actually, I began, meeting my grandfather's eyes for a brief moment of shared understanding. I've been reviewing the paperwork regarding the apartment and some of the other properties. It turns out there's a portion designated to me. The room froze, forks midair, wine glasses paused in hesitant hands. I could see my cousin's smile falter, my aunt's eyes darting with unease, and my siblings exchanging rapid, almost imperceptible glances. The dismissive, patronizing tones that had accompanied every conversation about my plans evaporated instantly. Questions spilled out of mouths that had once spoken over me. Wait, what do you mean? Are you serious? I didn't realize. I let them stumble in the silence that followed, the weight of understatement making the revelation land harder than any dramatic declaration could have. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I let the truth speak for itself, each word quietly reclaiming the respect and attention that had been denied to me for years. The subtle power reversal was complete. Those who had underestimated me now hesitated, unsure of how to respond, while I felt a surge of quiet, controlled triumph. For the first time in decades, I was no longer invisible, and as I watched their faces shift from disbelief to tentative acknowledgement, a thrilling sense of vindication settled in, a promise that this was only the beginning. I knew the reveal had to feel natural, not like a calculated show, so I invited the family to what I called a small housewarming, a casual Thursday evening, nothing ostentatious. The invitations were delivered with a calm voice and friendly tone. On the day, I arrived early and moved through the apartment with deliberate care. I fluffed pillows, lit a candle, and set out plain glassware that looked intentionally chosen. I wanted the space to speak for itself. Relatives arrived and performed the usual small talk, competitive anecdotes, and practiced affection. I welcomed them as any host would, steady and unflappable. They noticed changes immediately, though not always with the right words. A cousin murmured about how nice the place felt. An aunt complimented the curtains with a mechanical warmth. Their compliments were edged with something else, surprise, a flicker of recalculation. After dessert, I asked for a brief moment to speak. My voice was calm and then firmer. I thanked them and explained plainly that this apartment had come into my care. I mentioned the estate, the paperwork Grandpa and I had reviewed, and the designation that tied this unit to my line. I didn't dramatize. I framed it in terms of stewardship and continuity. When I placed copies of the documents on the coffee table and watched eyes scan the lines, the transition across faces was immediate. Confusion, realization, that faint, unsettled recalibration that follows when someone is forced to change an opinion. I spoke about plans, modest renovations, hosting family gatherings, preserving history. The tone I used suggested practicality and control rather than triumph. The most satisfying part was how ordinary my actions felt. I offered tea, served lemon cake, and showed relatives around the living room where a framed family photograph hung. I spoke about whose handwriting appeared on an old receipt and why that mattered. Domestic, humble gestures stripped away assumptions. They had believed I lacked practical competence. Now they watched me measure curtain lengths, select materials, and talk calmly with a contractor on the phone. The smallness of these acts made the room shift in ways that felt profound. Their questions grew more specific as the evening wore on. Who would manage bookings? Someone asked. Could the apartment be rented occasionally? Another inquired. When could family events be scheduled? Chimed a third. Each practical question was a small victory, a step away from the dismissals I had endured. I answered each one with clear timelines and thoughtful contingencies. A respectful calendar for relatives who wanted to host, a maintenance plan, names of trusted contractors. My answers were precise and unshowy, and that precision undid a lot of their assumptions. At one point, my oldest cousin, the loudest critic, tried to reclaim the conversation with a snide remark about finding one's place. Her attempt backfired when I responded not with anger, but with specifics, dates for renovations, projected timelines, and a proposal for a communal schedule. The flippant tone in her voice faltered and dissolved into polite nods. The quietness of the correction was more satisfying than any dramatic takedown. Competence is often the best refutation. Private, awkward compliments followed. A relative who had scorned my choices admitted half-jokingly that the space felt thoughtful. Another confessed they had underestimated my ability to manage things. These hedged admissions felt like small miracles. It was childishly gratifying and deeply adult at once. I wanted a triumphant shout, but I also cherished the slow, earned respect. Outside the apartment, the ripple widened. An uncle I hadn't heard from in months called about a clause in the family documents. A cousin forwarded a contractor's number with a simple note. Thought you'd want this. Offers that had been withheld were now extended in a tone of tentative deference. I moved from background character to someone whose opinion mattered, and watching the practical consequences, people scheduling visits, asking for keys, felt like a reclamation. There were softer moments, too. A niece tugged at my sleeve and asked if she could hang her art in the living room. I knelt to show her where it would look best, and felt a warm pleasure that had nothing to do with proving people wrong. It reminded me why this mattered beyond vindication. This space could hold memories that were not contingent on anyone's approval. The antagonist's humiliation was civil rather than theatrical. One relative attempted to challenge my claim at a follow-up meeting, but found the documentation, and my calm answers left no scaffolding for their accusations. Their flustered attempts met procedural facts. The embarrassment was quiet, a faltered sentence, an averted eyebrow, but it landed. People began to recalibrate the stories they told about me, replacing old condescension with a wary respect. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, listening to the city settle. Triumph and melancholy coexisted in my chest. I had proved them wrong without spectacle, and reclaimed a piece of family legacy, but the intimacy I had hoped to restore felt altered. My grandfather found me later and gave a small nod, a look that carried pride, and a hint of sorrow for what had been necessary. I closed the documents, placed them carefully in a drawer, and went to bed with plans forming in my head and a heart steadier than it had been in years. I slept, knowing this was only the first move tonight. After the dinner, Grandpa pulled me aside, his eyes twinkling with that familiar, quiet knowing. He didn't need to say much. The glance alone conveyed understanding, approval, and a touch of amusement. I realized then that he had seen everything unfold exactly as it should, his subtle guidance and discreet hints giving me the tools to claim what was mine without anger or spectacle. It wasn't just about the apartment or the estate. It was about timing, strategy, and the patience to let the family underestimate me for long enough that their assumptions would crumble under their own weight. I reflected on how years of careful observation and measured action had led me here. Emotional intelligence, I understood, wasn't innate. It was learned in silence, through watching, waiting, and choosing the right moments to act. My calm confidence had spoken louder than any argument, proving that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply exists, undeniable and self-evident. Grandpa's nod felt like a blessing and a quiet congratulations, acknowledging that I had grown into someone who could wield influence responsibly and assert justice without losing dignity. In that moment, I felt the full satisfaction of vindication. The family had learned, subtly but unmistakably, that underestimating me had been their greatest mistake, and I had achieved it not with fury, but with foresight. The moral balance was restored, and I finally understood the value of patience, restraint, and measured action in creating lasting, meaningful justice. Sitting alone in the quiet of my apartment that evening, I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had led me here. The years of neglect, the small humiliations, the favoritism that had left me invisible. I thought about my family, their flaws, their blind spots, and even their moments of unintended kindness. It was complicated. Anger lingered, but so did empathy. I realized that while I had claimed my rightful place, the journey wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could navigate life with patience, strategy, and integrity. The lessons were profound. Resilience comes from enduring what others dismiss. Empowerment grows from quiet preparation, and justice is sweetest when it is measured and intentional. I felt a sense of closure, yet it wasn't absolute happiness. Some relationships remained strained, and old wounds still tinged my memories. But there was also freedom, a new clarity that came from understanding my own strength and limits. I had transformed from the overlooked underdog into someone capable of commanding respect while maintaining compassion. And in that balance, I found a lingering resonance, a sense that the story wasn't only about family or inheritance. It was about growth, self-worth, and the quiet triumph of someone who had learned to wait, observe, and act with purpose.